Weiner suggested that an entire fake skull was planted and the workmen found it, but Mabel Kinward testified that the surface where the workmen were digging was unbroken. Robert Essex, a science teacher personally acquainted with Dawson in the years 1912 to 1915, provided interesting testimony about the Piltdown jaw, or jaws, as it turns out. Essex wrote in 1955, "Another jaw not mentioned by Dr. Weiner came from Piltdown much more human than the ape's jaw, and therefore much more likely to belong to the Piltdown skull parts, which are admittedly human. I saw and handled that jaw and know in whose bag it came to Dawson's office." Essex then gave more details. At the time, he had been a science master at a local grammar school located near Dawson's office. Essex stated, "One day when I was passing, I was beckoned in by one of the clerks, whom I knew well. He had called me in to show me a fossil half-jaw, much more human than apes, and with 3 molars firmly fixed in it. When I asked where this object came from, the answer was Piltdown. According to the clerk, it had been brought down by one of the diggers who, when he called and asked for Mr. Dawson, was carrying a bag such as might be used for carrying tools. When he was told that Mr. Dawson was busy in court, he said he would leave the bag and come back. And when he had gone, the clerk opened the bag and saw the jaw. Seeing me passing, he called me in. I told him he had better put it back and that Mr. Dawson would be cross if he knew of this. I found afterwards that when the digger returned, Mr. Dawson was still busy in court, so he picked up his bag and left." Essex later saw photographs of the Piltdown jaw. Noting the jaw was not the same one he had seen in Dawson's office, he communicated this information to the British Museum. So in other words, this testimony is saying that the workmen later found a modern-looking human jaw that may have gone with the skull that they found.
And it disappeared, basically.
Yeah, the guy brings it to Dawson's office, leaves the bag there for a while, comes back a few hours later. Dawson still hasn't looked at it. He just takes his bag and leaves, and it's never seen again. So we only have the testimony of this one guy who was a schoolmaster saying this, and maybe his biases need to come into account.
Yep.
But they use this to help talk about how this is a forgery.
The human skull is...
Yeah.
Yeah. Recent.
The discovery of a human jaw tends to confirm the view that the human skull found at Piltdown was native to the Gravels. Even if we grant that every other bone connected with Piltdown is a forgery, if the skull was found in situ, we are confronted with what could be one more case of Homo sapiens sapiens remains from the late Middle Pleistocene or early Late Pleistocene. Most recent writing, totally accepting that all the Piltdown fossils and implements were fraudulent, has focused on identifying the culprit. Weiner and Oakley, among others, insinuated that Dawson, the amateur paleontologist, was to blame. Woodward, the professional scientist, was absolved. But it appears that the Piltdown forgery demanded extensive technical knowledge and capability, beyond that seemingly possessed by Dawson, who was an amateur anthropologist. Keep in mind that the Piltdown Man fossils were accompanied by many fossils of extinct mammals. It appears that a professional scientist who had access to rare fossils and knew how to select them and modify them to give the impression of a genuine faunal assemblage of the proper age had to be involved in the Piltdown episode. Some have tried to make a case against Desjardins, who studied at a Jesuit college near Piltdown and became acquainted with Dawson as early as 1909. A stegodon tooth found at Piltdown was believed by Weiner and his associates to have come from a North African site that may have been visited by Desjardins in the period from 1906 to 1908, during which time he was a lecturer at Cairo University.
Huh.
Woodward is another suspect. He personally excavated some of the fossils. If they were planted, it seems he should have noticed something was wrong. This leads to the suspicion that he himself was involved in the plot. Also, he tightly controlled access to the original Piltdown fossils, which were stored under his care in the British Museum. This could be interpreted as an attempt to prevent evidence of forgery from being noticed by other scientists. Ronald Miller, author of The Piltdown Man, suspected Grafton Elliott Smith. Having a dislike for Woodward, Smith may have decided to entrap him with an elegant deception. Smith, like Desjardins, had spent time in Egypt, and so he had access to fossils that could have been planted at Piltdown. Frank Spencer, a professor of anthropology at Queens College of the City University of New York, has written a book that blames Sir Arthur Keith, a conservator of the Hunterian Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons, for the Piltdown forgery. Keith believed that modern humans evolved earlier than other scientists could accept, and this, according to Spencer, impelled him to conspire with Dawson to plant evidence favoring this hypothesis. Another suspect was William Solis, a professor of geology at Cambridge. He was named in a tape-recorded message left by English geologist James Douglas, who died in 1979. Solis disliked Woodward, who had criticized a method developed by Solis for making plaster casts of fossils. Douglas recalled he had sent mastodon teeth like those found at Piltdown to Solis from Bolivia, and that Solis had also received some potassium dichromate, the chemical apparently used in staining many of the Piltdown specimens. Solis had also borrowed some ape teeth from the Oxford Museum collection. According to Douglas, Solis secretly enjoyed seeing Woodward duped by the Piltdown forgeries. But if Piltdown does represent a forgery, it is likely that something more than personal revenge was involved. Spencer said that the evidence had been tailored to withstand scientific scrutiny and thereby promote a particular interpretation of the human fossil record. One possible motivation for forgery by a professional scientist was the inadequacy of the evidence for human evolution that had accumulated by the beginning of the 20th century. Darwin had published The Origin of Species in 1859, setting off almost immediately a search for fossil evidence connecting Homo sapiens with the ancient Miocene apes. Leaving aside the discoveries suggesting the presence of fully modern humans in the Pliocene and Miocene, Java Man and the Heidelberg jaw were the only fossil discoveries that science had come up with. And, as we have seen in Chapter 8, Java Man in particular did not enjoy unanimous support within the scientific community. Right from the start, there were ominous suggestions that the ape-like skull did not really belong with the human-like thigh bone found 45 feet away. Also, a number of scientists in England and America, such as Arthur Smith Woodward, Grafton Elliott Smith, and Sir Arthur Keith, were developing alternative views of human evolution in which the formation of a high-browed human-like cranium preceded the formation of a human-like jaw. So this is what I was talking about.
Right.
Java Man, however, showed a low-browed cranium like that of an ape. Since so many modern scientists have indulged in speculation about the identity and motives of the presumed Piltdown forger, we would also like to introduce a tentative hypothesis. Consider the following scenario. Workmen at Barkham Manor actually discovered a genuine Middle Pleistocene skull in the manner described by Kinward. Pieces of it were given to Dawson. Dawson, who had regularly been communicating with Woodward, notified him. Woodward, who had been developing his own theory of human evolution and who was very worried about science's lack of evidence for human evolution after 50 years of research, planned and implemented the forgery. He did not act alone, but in concert with a select number of scientists connected with the British Museum who assisted in acquiring the specimens and preparing them so as to withstand the investigations of scientists not in on the secret. Oakley, who played a big role in the Piltdown expose himself, wrote, "The Trinal or Java Man material was tantalizingly incomplete, and for many scientists it was inadequate as confirmation of Darwin's view of human evolution. I have sometimes wondered whether it was a misguided impatience for the discovery of a more acceptable missing link that formed one of the tangled skein of motives behind the Piltdown forgery." Weiner also admitted the possibility that there could have been a mad desire to assist the doctrine of human evolution by furnishing the requisite missing link. Piltdown might have offered irresistible attraction to some fanatical biologist to make good what nature had created but omitted to preserve. Unfortunately for the hypothetical conspirators, the discoveries that turned up over the next few decades did not support the evolutionary theory represented by the Piltdown forgery. The discoveries of new specimens of Java Man and Beijing Man, as well as the Australopithecus finds in Africa, were accepted by many scientists as proving the low-browed ape-man ancestor hypothesis, which was the very idea the high-browed Piltdown Man was meant to discredit. Time passed, and the difficulties in constructing a viable evolutionary lineage for the fossil hominids increased. At a critical moment, the remaining insiders connected with the British Museum chose to act. Perhaps enlisting unwitting colleagues, they organized a systematic expose of the forgery they had perpetrated earlier that century. In the course of this expose, perhaps some of the specimens were further modified by chemical and physical means to lend credence to the idea of a forgery. The idea of a group of conspirators cooperating in connection with the British Museum, perpetuating a forgery, and then later exposing the same forgery is bound to strike many as far-fetched. But it is founded upon as much or as little evidence as the indictments made by others. Doubt has been cast on so many British scientists individually, including some from the British Museum, that this conspiracy theory does not enlarge the circle of possible wrongdoers. Perhaps there were no conspirators at the British Museum, but, according to many scientists, someone with scientific training acting alone or with others did carry out a very successful forgery. Gavin De Beer, a director of the British Museum of Natural History, believed the methods employed in uncovering the Piltdown hoax would make a successful repetition of a similar type of forgery virtually impossible in the future. But a forger with knowledge of modern chemical and radiometric dating methods could manufacture a fake that would not be easily detectable. Indeed, we can hardly be certain that there is not another Piltdown-like forgery in one of the world's great museums just waiting to be uncovered. The impact of Piltdown remains, therefore, damaging, but incidents of this sort appear to be rare, given our present knowledge. There is, however, another more insidious and pervasive kind of cheating: the routine editing and reclassifying of data according to rigid theoretical preconceptions. Vincent de Pradine, of the, okay, here we go with French names again, of the École d'Anthropologie in Paris, wrote in his book, "One often finds men of science possessed by a preconceived idea who, without committing real frauds, do not hesitate to give observed facts a twist in the direction which agrees with their theories. A man may imagine, for example, that the law of progress in prehistoric industries must show itself everywhere and always in the smallest of details. Seeing the simultaneous presence in a deposit of carefully finished artifacts and others of a coarser type, he decides that there must be two levels, the lower one yielding the coarser specimens. He will class his finds according to their type, not according to the stratum in which he found them. If at the base he finds a finely worked implement, he will declare that there has been accidental penetration and that the specimen must be reintegrated with the site of its origin by placing it with the items from the higher levels. He will end up with real trickery in the stratigraphic presentation of his specimens, trickery in aid of a preconceived idea, but more or less unconsciously done by a man of good faith whom no one would call fraudulent. This case is often seen, and if I mention no names, it is not because I do not know any."
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I think this is a key, and I've heard Cremo on some interviews he's given, and that's what he talks about. He thinks that in large part this is an unconscious thing, and that these facts that we're going through in this book have been forgotten because. Not because there's like some gigantic conspiracy, but just because it's human nature.
Right. Well, I wonder if, I was just going all conspiracy on this Jesuit guy.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if
was he going around trying to insert forgeries to make it to discredit the whole thing? Yeah,
because it's like, that's what I was wondering is would somebody... I can conceive of this possibility that somebody that's interested in this stuff, but that maybe is just a little bit psychotic in a way, just sowing chaos, right? Okay, I'm going to bring some fossils from this completely different place.
Yeah.
And just stick them in there.
Right. Oh, look what I found.
Just to confuse it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not like he has a specific agenda that's like, okay, I want the creationism model to hold out, or I want the evolution model to hold out, but it's just like, okay, there's these two camps fighting, and I'm just like, there's this new find. I'm going to show up and I'm just going to throw some stuff in there and just to mess with them. And that person is the only person who knows really what's going on. And that's like a power trip.
That's true. That's true. Yep.
You never know. There's all kinds of, and going back to what I was saying last time, who knows how many dozens and dozens of people are part, because they're hiring all these laymen basically to just go and dig.
Yeah.
Who knows what they
So
might
what would you
do?
call that? Like a paleontologist?
Trollogist? yeah. That's right. He's a paleontrol.
Yeah. He's practicing paleontology.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's